Today's demonstration is going to be on shading and value using pencils. And I have my still life set up as a simple orange and a folded piece of paper, it's like thick cardstock. I have my light set up to cast some shadows. I set up a little simple backdrop with a towel so I can have some cast shadows in the background. I started with my contour drawing and I posted a picture of the image of the still life and another module below this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have my F pencil, it's sort of a middle of the road pencil, a little darker than my H that I have. My HB has gone missing. And the first thing I'm going to do after I have done my contour drawing is start to sort of outline some of the bigger shadows, very lightly, giving me a guide as to where, especially the really bigger, stronger shadows are for when I shade them in a little bit later. It's a little trickier to do on the orange because it has a very smooth gradation from dark to light and dark again. But I'm just kind of very lightly penciling in the area of the darkest shadow that I could see. I do this sometimes, and other times I don't, but it's a nice thing for, especially for beginners, start to see where the shadows are. Now I'm gonna just start to shade things in. I'm a big fan of hatching, so I'll start with some lines pretty tight and close together, and then I'll come back through filling it in with lines that are pointing in a slightly different direction, overlapping but going beyond the previous level. And the way I smooth it out is just continuing to go over and go over until all those little lines are filled. And then I have to go back. A lot of times we'll be going back and forth, deepening and smoothing out gradations. Now the edge of the shadow is just like a little fuzzy edge. So I'm trying to represent that. I'm going to switch to a lighter pencil now. My next one, I'll go with the H. And this way I can maybe get that fuzzy edge a little easier without having to rely so much on how much pressure I'm putting down. I'm going back to my dark pencil 4B, and I'm going to just get into this right along the edge here is just really the deepest, darkest shadow. So I'm going to come in with my darker pencil and fill that in a bit more. Next I'm going to continue on to the shading on the orange, going back to my F, sort of middle tone neutral pencil, and I'm going to start with hatched lines, shading in this area that I outlined as sort of the darkest, most distinct area that I can see where the shadow is. Shadows have so many variations in them. Sometimes it's just a dark shadow and contrasted by a light area next to it, but more often inside each shadow there are a lot of layers of shifts in light. So within the shadow there's highlights and shadows. And that's something that takes some practice to get used to, seeing. So now I shaded in the entire band that I sort of outlined, and this back area here has some reflected light going on, so that's actually pretty light. So I don't want to get in there too dark, but I do want the gradation to be smooth. So just along that back edge with a light touch, I'm adding some hatches. My hatches are sort of following the direction of the orange at this point. I'm going to come back into the other side of this shadow and start to gradate it out into the highlighted area. there's a little bit of a flat spot right there. That's what that little ridge I sketched in was. So we're starting to get a gradation going, but we definitely need to push it farther. This whole shadow is more or less the same value. So now I'm going to put a little more pressure on my pencil and come back in and continuing to look up at my still life more than I'm looking down at my paper. I'm trying to emphasize those darker areas of the darker shadows within the shadows. And then here it comes into light. I changed the direction of my hatches. I just sort of do it instinctually at this point. I don't really have a rhyme or reason as to what shape hatches I have at the moment. I do try to fill in the gaps, color in a solid tone by overlapping the hatches in different directions. Sometimes I will draw the hatches as a cross contour, somewhat cross contour form. So now I'm extending this a little more. The shadow does come out farther, but it's quite a bit lighter as it comes out, so my hatches are a little farther apart. Coming back into the edge of the dark as it merges into the lighter area. I used to do a lot of blending with my fingers, which is a great technique, and it can be really satisfying in creating smooth finishes. But more recently, I've really enjoyed working more so with hatches and how much pressure I'm putting down on the pencil and the different weights of pencils as well in order to create that illusion of depth. And I just keep going back over and back over, being selective where I put my marks, looking up at my orange more so than I'm looking at my page. And there's definitely a shadow all along this fold of paper. Now in here, there's some smaller details around these wrinkles in the stem. In between each wrinkle, it sort of bulbs out and then recedes inside the crease. And there are some small gradations that you can create to illustrate the shadows in here, to show how these wrinkles in the stem are sort of depressed into the skin of the orange. They're not just flat. And I think I could extend that even farther. I'm coming back in to correct this little area, add a little more smoothness to the gradient. Okay, now I'm going to move on to grabbing my soft dark pencil and pumping up some of the darker shadows just to add a nice wider range of values, especially in here. This one wrinkle right here, I've got a really dark shadow in it. Okay, switching back to my F, I'm going to start doing some, oh, that's not my F, that's my H. Here's my F. Okay, I'm going to start to get going on these shadows on the folded corner of the paper. There's a pretty strong triangle form right here. It does get darker closer to the edge, and then it sort of gets a little bit lighter, and it does have a fuzzy edge. Trying to represent that, changing the pressure, changing the direction of my stroke. I'm coming back here because I just saw something I want to fix. I do jump around sometimes, trying to be organized for the video, but whatever catches my eye, I sort of just jump to, more so than a systematic